The soft light of the morning sun streamed through the white lace curtains, filling the room with a warm, golden glow. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut flowers standing in a glass vase on the dresser. Alice Jennings sat in front of the vanity, carefully applying the final touch of makeup. Her chestnut hair cascaded freely over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with joy and excitement. Hanging on the back of the chair was her wedding dress, elegant with delicate lace inserts and a long train. Next to it on the table lay a pair of pearl earrings that she was about to put on. Today was the day she had been waiting for all her life. The day she hoped would mark the beginning of a new, happy chapter. From the adjacent room came the laughter of her 7-year-old son, Liam. His cheerful voice blended with the muffled sound of cartoons, creating a cozy atmosphere. "Liam, are you ready?" Alice called out, smiling at her reflection in the mirror. "Yes, Mom. I'm just tying my bow tie," Liam replied with characteristic childhood seriousness. Alice knew how hard Liam was trying. He always wanted to please her, especially on important occasions. She remembered how he had offered to be her little helper at the wedding. Her heart swelled with love for her son. A moment later, Liam entered the room, holding a bow tie that just wouldn't tie straight. His dark hair was neatly combed, and there was a faint pillow crease on his cheek that he was vigorously rubbing with his hand. "Mom, help, please," he asked, holding out the bow tie. Alice laughed, stood up, and knelt in front of her son to tie the bow tie. "You are the most handsome today," she said, carefully tying the fabric. "No, you are the most beautiful, Mom," Liam replied, his eyes sparkling with genuine joy. Alice took Liam's hands and hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of their bond filling her with energy. At that moment, James appeared in the doorway, a tall, stately man with dark hair and a deep, velvety voice. He was dressed in a perfect black suit that accentuated his charisma. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "Well, how are my favorites? Ready for the big day?" he asked, smiling broadly. Alice nodded, trying not to notice how his gaze cooled when he looked at Liam. "Liam, are you still struggling with that bow tie?" James said sternly, leaning down to the boy. "I almost," Liam began, but James interrupted him. "Give it here, I'll do it faster," he said, quickly snatching the bow tie from the boy's hands. James deftly tied the bow tie, but in doing so, he slightly jerked Liam by the shoulder, causing the boy to stumble. "You need to be more careful, Liam. Today is not the time for mistakes," he said, his tone soft, but with a hidden reproach. Alice frowned but quickly regained her composure. "James, he's just a child. No need to be so strict," she said, hoping to ease the tension. James merely gave a curt nod, as if she shouldn't interfere. When James left the room, Liam looked at his mother with concern. "Mom, I don't want to upset him," he whispered. Alice stroked his head and smiled. "Don't worry, dear. You did nothing wrong. You're my hero today. Remember that." The words reassured Liam, and for a moment he felt safe in his mother's embrace. But a flicker of worry crossed Alice's mind, which she tried to suppress. "Everything will be fine," she told herself. "Today is a special day." Taking a deep breath, Alice stood up, straightened the dress on the hanger, and began to gather her things. She had no idea that this day, which was supposed to be the happiest of her life, would change her destiny forever. The church, adorned with garlands of white and pastel blue flowers, looked like something out of a fairy tale. The high vaults of the building reflected the light of countless candles, creating an atmosphere of coziness and solemnity. Guests, dressed in elegant suits and dresses, took their seats on wooden benches, whispering and casting interested glances toward the door from which the bride was to appear. Alice stood behind the curtains, clutching a bouquet of fresh white roses. Her hands trembled slightly, not from stage fright, but from the mix of emotions swirling inside her. She felt Liam gently tug at the hem of her dress. "Mom, you're so beautiful. You look like a princess from a fairy tale," he said, looking at her with admiration. Alice knelt down to be at eye level with her son and gently hugged him. "Thank you, my hero. And you are my prince." Everything will be fine, she said, trying to convey confidence in her voice. Behind her, she heard footsteps and James entered. His suit was impeccable, and he exuded confidence that usually won people over. But when his gaze fell on Liam, his expression changed slightly. Liam, we've talked about not touching Mom's dress. It needs to stay perfect, James said with a smile, but there was sternness in his voice. Alice placed her hand on James's shoulder, trying to prevent further remarks. He's just excited, James. Today is a special day for him, too, she said. James nodded, but his gaze lingered on Liam a bit longer than necessary. The organ began to play the first chords of the wedding march. Alice, clutching her bouquet, took a deep breath and stepped out into the aisle, holding Liam's hand. All eyes were on her, and the admiring smiles of the guests slightly eased her tension. Mom, there are so many people, Liam whispered, pressing slightly against her side. It's okay. Just stay by my side, Alice reassured him, gently squeezing his hand. Reaching the altar, Alice looked at James, standing next to the priest. His smile was wide, but his gaze was still tense. The priest began the ceremony, speaking of love, loyalty, and the creation of a new family. Alice listened, but her thoughts kept returning to Liam. He sat in the front row, quietly swinging his legs. Alice knew it was hard for him to stay still for long. At one point, Liam, apparently forgetting the warning, quietly jumped in his seat, drawing James's attention. Liam, sit still, James whispered through clenched teeth, leaning toward him. Alice noticed this and gently touched James's hand to distract him. It's okay. He's just a child, she said with a smile, but her words seemed to only increase his irritation. When the priest asked, "If anyone has any objections to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace," a silence fell over the room. Alice felt a strange tension grip her shoulders. Her gaze automatically fell on Liam, who was again swinging his legs slightly, as if trying to dispel boredom. Mom, I want cake, he whispered, unable to resist. Alice smiled but noticed James frowning. She decided to intervene before he could say anything. After the ceremony, dear, for sure. Just wait a little longer, she said, soothing Liam. The priest continued, and Alice returned her attention to the ceremony. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had changed. She became more acutely aware of the tension between James and Liam. After the ceremony, the guests spilled outside for photos. Liam, happily running among the crowd, accidentally bumped into a table with drinks, slightly jostling it. A few glasses wobbled, but no one noticed except James. Liam, can't you just stand still? He said sharply, approaching the boy. Alice immediately intervened, stepping between them. James, it's no big deal. He's just playing. Please calm down, she said, trying to keep her composure. James clenched his jaw but stepped back. However, his gaze betrayed his irritation. When everyone returned to the banquet hall, the tension in the air became more palpable. Liam sat next to his mother, but his behavior became more withdrawn. He no longer ran or laughed as he had at the beginning of the day. Alice watched her son, her heart aching. She leaned down and whispered to him, It's okay, dear. Today is a long day, but we'll go home soon. Liam just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. Alice looked at James. He was sitting at the other end of the table, chatting animatedly with friends. But every time his gaze fell on Liam, his expression changed. At that moment, Alice felt a wave of doubt wash over her. She didn't know what to call this feeling, but it was all too familiar. Something's not right, she thought. The warm light of the chandeliers reflected off the walls of the banquet hall, filling the room with a cozy, almost magical glow. The tables were covered with snow-white tablecloths, adorned with exquisite dishes, and in the center of each stood live bouquets of roses and hydrangeas. The wedding party was in full swing. Guests enjoyed the food, raised glasses to the newlyweds, and chatted excitedly. The air was filled with a sense of celebration, but Alice couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. Liam, as if sensing his mother's mood, stayed close to her. Usually, he was the life of any party, but today his eyes were more guarded. He moved carefully, as if trying to avoid any accidental mistakes. James, on the other hand, seemed fully immersed in the festive atmosphere. His loud laughter echoed through the room, and his confident movements drew attention. Alice watched him from across the table, her hands gripping a champagne glass. She wanted to share his joy, but something inside her resisted. "Mom, can I have a piece of cake?" Liam asked softly, tugging at Alice's elbow. "Of course, dear. I'll get it for you right away," she replied, smiling gently. Liam stood up from the table and headed toward the dessert table where colorful pastries and the large wedding cake were displayed. His eyes lit up when he saw a slice with strawberry frosting. He reached for the plate, but at that moment his small hand accidentally knocked over a glass of juice. The glass wobbled, and its contents spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. In any other situation, this would have been seen as amusing or inconsequential, but not today. James, who was standing nearby, turned at the sound. He quickly approached Liam, his face cold as marble. "Liam," he said sharply, grabbing the boy by the shoulder. "How many times do I have to tell you to be careful?" James's voice was loud enough for the nearby guests to fall silent and turn to look. Alice instantly stood up, her heart racing. "James, please calm down," she intervened, stepping closer. "It's just juice. I'll clean it up." But James, as if not hearing her, leaned down to Liam. "You need to learn responsibility. Every time it's the same thing. You ruin everything," he said, his words cutting like a knife. Liam bit his lip, his eyes filling with tears. He didn't look up from the floor, afraid to meet James's gaze. "That's enough," Alice said sharply, stepping between them. "It's just juice, James. Stop talking to my son like that." James looked at her, his face momentarily contorted with anger. But noticing the guests watching intently, he stepped back. "I'm sorry if I was too strict," he said with a forced smile directed at the onlookers. "I just want everything to be perfect." Alice looked at James. His words seemed like an apology, but his eyes held only anger and frustration. She turned to Liam, hugged him, and softly whispered, "It's okay, dear. You did nothing wrong." Soon the tension in the room dissipated, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. Liam sat next to his mother, silently playing with a napkin he had folded into the shape of a little boat. The guests resumed their conversations, trying not to discuss the recent scene. Only Alice's close friend Sarah approached her. "Alice, that was awful. He had no right to treat him that way," Sarah said softly, looking at Liam. Alice sighed and looked at her friend. "He's just nervous. This day is important to him." Alice tried to explain, but even to herself, her words felt hollow. Sarah squinted, as if not believing the excuses, but decided not to say anything more. The evening continued, but Alice could no longer enjoy the celebration. She kept a close eye on Liam, who had become very quiet. At one point, he approached her, carefully holding a small toy car. "Mom, can I go play over there?" he asked, pointing to a small corner of the room where there were toys for children. "Of course. Go ahead, dear," she said, trying to smile. Liam ran off to play with the toys, and Alice stayed at the table watching him. At that moment, James approached her with a glass of wine. "You always spoil him," he said, smirking slightly. "He needs to learn to behave properly." "He's behaving perfectly," Alice replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "He's just a child, James." James didn't respond, but there was something cold in his gaze that made Alice shiver. A little while later, Alice heard the sound of something breaking. Turning around, she saw Liam accidentally drop a glass on the floor. The glass shattered into several large shards. A few guests turned to look, but no one paid much attention. However, James immediately stepped toward the boy. His face paled, and his eyes flashed with anger. "You again? Why do you always ruin everything?" he said sharply, his voice growing louder. Liam stepped back, looking at James with fear. "James!" Alice exclaimed, rushing toward them. But before she could reach them, James quickly raised his hand and slapped Liam across the face. The sound of the slap echoed louder than any other sound in the room. Liam fell to the floor, his eyes filling with tears. Alice froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a few seconds, time seemed to stand still. Then she rushed to her son, hugged him tightly, and pressed him to her chest. "How dare you?" she screamed, looking at James. "This is my fault for letting you go this far." The guests stood in shocked silence, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered, while others just stared, unable to look away. James stood motionless, his face pale. He tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. He looked around the room, seeing the judgmental faces of the guests. You don't deserve to be part of our family," Alice said, her voice trembling with anger and pain. She stood up, taking Liam's hand, and left the room under the shocked gazes of the guests. Ahead of her lay the most difficult decision of her life, but at that moment, she knew one thing. She would protect her son at any cost. The cool evening air hit Alice as she stepped out of the banquet hall. Liam held her hand, his eyes still red from tears, his lips trembling. Alice hugged him tightly, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed everyone could hear it. She sat Liam down on a nearby bench, shaded by trees, and knelt in front of him. The boy looked at her, trying to understand why she was so upset. "Mom, I didn't mean to upset you," he mumbled, his voice soft as if afraid to draw James's attention again. Alice took his hands and shook her head. "Liam, this is not your fault. Never think you did something wrong. Do you understand?" she said, her voice filled with resolve but trembling with emotion. The boy nodded, but he couldn't hold back new tears. Alice hugged him tightly, feeling tears stream down her own cheeks. After a few moments, Sarah and Jack approached them. Sarah held Alice's coat and Liam's small jacket. She silently draped them over their shoulders, sitting down next to them on the bench. "Alice, I can't believe he did that. It's unacceptable," Sarah said, her voice filled with indignation. "He's been showing who he really is for a long time," Jack added, sitting down on the other side of Alice. "We saw everything, and if you decide you need help, Sarah and I will always be here for you." Alice looked at her friends, feeling their words give her strength, but inside, doubts still swirled. I should have realized sooner, but I wanted everything to work out so badly. I thought he would change," she whispered, looking at the ground. "Alice, this is not your fault. You did everything you could. But now the most important thing is to protect Liam," Jack said firmly. Alice nodded. She knew Jack was right, but accepting it was not easy. Her thoughts raced between pain, anger, and fear of what lay ahead. When they returned home, Alice tucked Liam into bed. The boy held her hand as she told him a bedtime story. Her voice was calm, but inside, a storm raged. She watched as Liam finally fell asleep, his breathing steady. His face, still reddened from the slap, filled her with a new wave of anger. She closed the door to his room and went to the living room. Sarah and Jack were sitting at the kitchen table, silently sipping tea, waiting for her. Alice sat down next to them and buried her head in her hands. "I can't leave it like this," she finally said. "He hit my son. I won't let him come near Liam again." Sarah sighed with relief, and Jack nodded. "That's the right decision, Alice, but you'll need help. Sarah and I will call a lawyer tomorrow morning. You need to file for a protective order," Jack said. "We'll be with you every step of the way," Sarah added, placing a hand on her friend's shoulder. Alice looked at them, and for the first time in a long time, she felt she was not alone. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. The next morning, James showed up at Alice's door. He stood there with a forced smile and a bouquet of flowers, as if trying to erase what had happened the night before. Alice saw him through the window and felt her heart stop. She didn't want to see him, but she knew she had to. She opened the door, standing in the doorway like a shield. "Alice, I came to apologize. Last night, it was a mistake. I just lost control," he began, his voice almost sincere. "James, do you think this changes anything? You hit my son. You've been hurting him not just last night, but all those times I tried to justify your actions." Her voice was cold and firm. James scowled. "I was strict because I want him to grow up to be a good person. It wasn't abuse. You're overreacting," he said, shifting to a defensive tone. Alice raised her hand to stop him. "Don't try to justify your actions. You will no longer be part of our lives. I've already contacted a lawyer," she said, her words falling like a hammer. James's face paled. He tried to say something, but Alice closed the door, leaving him standing on the porch. Alice breathed a sigh of relief, feeling for the first time that she had taken control of the situation. She returned to the kitchen, where Sarah was already on the phone with the lawyer, and Jack was writing a list of necessary documents. "You did it, Alice," Jack said, smiling. "This is just the beginning, but you're on the right path." Alice nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. She knew the battle was just beginning, but she was ready. For Liam, she was ready for anything. The courtroom was spacious and sternly decorated. High wooden benches, a massive judge's podium, heavy curtains on the windows. Everything gave the room a solemn and intimidating atmosphere. Alice sat at one of the tables, her hands clutching a folder of documents. Next to her was her lawyer, Anna Rodriguez, a confident woman with a piercing gaze and a calm voice that inspired trust. Across the room sat James. His black suit looked impeccable, but his tense face and nervous gestures betrayed his inner turmoil. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, trying to prepare him for the hearing. Alice looked across the room at James. He seemed like a stranger, his gaze cold, but now she wouldn't let him intimidate her. Her focus was solely on one goal: to protect Liam. The judge, an elderly man with gray hair, entered the room and took his seat. His deep voice echoed through the room. Case number 4, 1578, Alice Jennings versus James Carlisle. Hearing the petition for protection in the interest of the minor, Liam Jennings. Please present your opening statements. Anna Rodriguez stood up first. Her voice was confident but without aggression. Your Honor, we are here to protect the rights and safety of a child who has been subjected to physical and emotional abuse by the defendant. We have video evidence confirming the incident, as well as witness statements that will describe the constant pressure exerted on the child. James shot Anna a quick glance but remained silent. His lawyer stood up and began his defense. Honorable Court, the actions of my client were the result of a momentary emotional outburst. This was not a premeditated act of abuse. We believe that such accusations are destructive to the family and create a false impression of my client's intentions. Alice felt her heart tighten. She looked at Anna, who nodded as if to say, "Everything is under control." Alice was called to the stand first. She stood up and approached the podium, trying to maintain her composure, though her palms were sweaty. "Ms. Jennings, please tell the court what happened on your wedding day," Anna prompted. Alice took a deep breath. After the ceremony during the reception, my son accidentally knocked over a glass of juice. James, my husband, approached him and instead of simply explaining that he needed to be careful, hit him in front of all the guests. This was not the first instance of his aggression, but this time it was done publicly, humiliating my son, she said, her voice slightly trembling but confident. Can you confirm that this was not the first incident? Anna asked. Yes, throughout our relationship, James often displayed irritation and strictness toward Liam. He believed that Liam was too disorganized or loud, and often criticized him. When Alice finished, the judge thanked her and called the next witnesses. Sarah and Jack gave their statements, describing James's behavior at the wedding and his treatment of Liam. He hit Liam so hard that the entire room fell silent. He was not just a strict father. He was a man who had lost control. Sarah stated firmly. The crucial moment of the hearing was the presentation of the video evidence. A guest's camera had accidentally captured the moment when James hit Liam. The video was played in the courtroom, and a heavy silence fell over the room. The sound of the slap, Liam's crying, and Alice's scream filled the air, making everyone hold their breath. The judge turned to James. "Mr. Carlyle, what do you have to say in your defense?" James stood up, his face expressionless. "It was a moment of weakness. I just wanted my son to learn to be more disciplined. I didn't intend to cause him harm," he said, but his words rang hollow. After the presentation of the evidence, the judge withdrew to make his decision. Alice felt the tension gripping her chest. Anna leaned over to her. "We've done everything we can. The judge saw who he really is." A few minutes later, the judge returned to the courtroom. He sat down at his podium and struck the gavel, calling for order. "Based on the evidence presented in the witness statements, I rule in favor of the plaintiff. The restraining order against Mr. Carlyle takes effect immediately. He is prohibited from coming within 100 meters of the minor, Liam Jennings. Furthermore, the defendant is required to undergo rehabilitation and psychological counseling." Alice felt tears of relief begin to stream down her cheeks. She looked at Anna, Sarah, and Jack, who smiled at her reassuringly. James stood motionless, his face pale. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. He looked around the room, seeing the judgmental faces of the spectators. You don't deserve to be part of our family," Alice said, her voice trembling with anger and pain. She stood up, taking Liam's hand, and left the courtroom under the shocked gazes of the spectators. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of relief. She hugged Sarah and Jack, thanking them for their support. "You were incredibly strong, Alice. You did it," Sarah said, hugging her. "If he tries anything again, we'll be right here," Jack added. Alice looked at them, feeling a wave of gratitude. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way. With the support of her friends, she was confident that she and Liam would have a brighter future. The story of Alice is a profound lesson in the power of love and courage to protect those who matter most, despite facing control, violence, and manipulation. Alice never faltered. She stood up against injustice to safeguard her son. The story underscores that violence is never the solution and that the vulnerable need protection. It also highlights the invaluable role of friends and family in providing support during the most challenging times. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon. The soft morning light filtered through the white lace curtains, filling the spacious kitchen with a warm, golden glow. Liam sat at the table, engrossed in coloring a picture with crayons. His face, which had recently been guarded and sullen, now shone with joy and peace. On the paper, he drew two stick figures, himself and Alice, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Alice watched him from the kitchen, leaning against the sink with a cup of hot coffee in her hands. This was their new beginning. Their home was not large, but it was cozy. She felt free, as if the stone that had weighed on her heart for so long had finally been lifted. "Mom, look, it's us," Liam exclaimed, turning to her with a beaming smile. Alice walked over and sat next to him, taking the drawing in her hands. "This is amazing, Liam. You're a real artist," she said, ruffling his hair. "Mom, can we go to the park soon?" "You promised," he reminded her, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "Of course, dear. Let's just finish breakfast first," she replied, feeling her heart warm at his happiness. Later that morning, Alice and Liam headed to the park near their house. The green grass glistened with morning dew, birds sang, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshness. Liam ran ahead, eager to reach the playground where other children were already playing. Alice sat on a nearby bench, watching him. She saw how Liam laughed, ran, and swung on the swings. His laughter filled her soul with light. This moment was so simple, yet for Alice, it meant everything. It was a moment of true freedom and happiness. "Mom, look how high I'm swinging," Liam shouted, pumping his legs to go higher. "That's great, dear. Just hold on tight," she called back, smiling. Jack sat down next to her on the bench, holding a bouquet of daisies. He smiled, watching Liam. You know, he looks so much happier. You did it, Alice, he said. Alice looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Jack. Without you and Sarah, I couldn't have done it. But now everything is behind us and we can start living for real, she said, gently squeezing his hand. That evening, after Liam had fallen asleep, Alice sat by the window with a cup of tea. The moon shone brightly, illuminating the room. She took out an old photo album from the shelf. Among the pictures were snapshots of her and James. Smiles, happy moments that had seemed so genuine. She looked at one of the photos for a long time. A picture of James hugging her. That image no longer brought her pain, but it also held no warmth. It was the past, and it could no longer control her. Alice took out a box, placed the old photos inside, closed it, and put it away in the closet. Goodbye, she whispered, feeling the last shadow of pain lift from her heart. The next day, Alice took Liam to his new school. The boy was a bit nervous, but it was an excited nervousness. The teachers welcomed him warmly, and the children quickly accepted him into their group. When she returned home, Alice felt a lightness, as if the world was opening up new possibilities for her. She began looking through job listings and by the end of the day found an interesting offer, a part-time design position at a local company. It was an opportunity to use her skills and provide a stable future for Liam. Over the next few weeks, life for Alice and Liam settled into a peaceful routine. They learned to enjoy every moment. Each morning began with smiles and each evening ended with stories and goodnight kisses. One day, as Alice sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, Liam said, "Mom, I'm glad we're together now. You're my favorite person in the whole world." Alice hugged him tightly, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "And you're my favorite, Liam. We'll always be together," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Alice and Liam proved that love and inner strength could overcome anything. They chose freedom and happiness, leaving pain and fear behind. Their story became the beginning of a new life, filled with hope, laughter, and confidence in the future.